Before we move on to question and answer time, I'd like to introduce Paul Lambert, Visual Effects Supervisor for Dune. Paul, can you come up on camera? He's now joining us despite it being 4 a.m. for him. So thank you, Paul, for getting up extra early in order to join us. Paul is a visual effects supervisor with 25 years of experience in our industry. He has collaborated with some of the most acclaimed directors in Hollywood and has earned back-to-back Oscars for his work on First Man and Blade Runner 2049. He has also won and been nominated for multiple BAFTAs, Emmys, and VES awards. Throughout his distinguished career, Paul has excelled in combining both the creative and technical aspects of visual effects. Notably, while at Digital Domain, he invented the algorithm for Nuke's image-based gear in the IBK. Paul, thanks for joining us here, despite the time. So now I'd like to invite everybody on up. Let's dive on in.
Well, thank you for having me, and good morning to everybody. And I just want to say thank you to Robin, Tristan, and Brian for producing some amazing videos to break down the work. It was very cool.
Thanks, mate.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
All right, to kick things off, I just wanted to open one of the aspects of the visual effects that I've been struck by, especially in kind of the discussions we had leading up to this and other talks you've given, is the practical effects, like the dedication to making sure that in camera there was at least some reference for the visual effects artists to pick up on and match. And I was just wondering, there's a lot of examples that weren't even in the presentations yet tonight. The hunter-seeker scene with the hologram, the palm trees during the battle, and the flames that were happening over there, the way that you actually accomplished the worm sign and the reference for that. If you could kind of talk a little bit about how you decided to focus on the practical effects and a couple of the examples there.
Yeah, from the very outset, the idea was to try and keep everything as grounded and as photoreal as possible, and we spent a good part of like 6 months in pre-production actually discussing various techniques to be able to give us the best basis for the visual effects, and that obviously involves a lot of practical effects. And I think it was about 18 tons of sand and dust were actually used on the production. So basically every day we had sand constantly blowing throughout the sets. And there were particular days where you would actually get home to the hotel and it would take 2 showers to actually get rid of that stuff out of your hair and out of your clothes. And there are some very funny visuals, because there was one sequence, which was Brian's sequence of when Paul and Jessica are flying in the sandstorm, and we'd built this enclosed area where basically Gert, our special effects supervisor, just basically blasted sand into this area, and anybody who actually went into that area came out as orange as you can imagine. So seeing the first AD actually come out of there with actual orange McDonald hair was a sight to see. And you mentioned the hologram. That was a particular approach to a problem in that we knew that Paul Timothy was going to have to interact with a hologram, and I was weighing up the idea of having to do a fully photoreal Paul close up to get the interaction of the hologram on his skin, to get the beautiful subsurface, because that kind of thing takes a while to do. And but then I wanted to see if there was a way in which we could do that practically. And obviously we couldn't create a hologram, but then what we were able to do was we came up with this idea that Denis got the holographic bush asset final by Denis, and what the guys at Teenage were able to come up with was an on-set tracking technique to be able to work out where Paul was on set interactively. And then what we decided to do was slice that bush into very thin slices and project with an actual projector that slice onto Paul. So when he changed position, it would then project another slice onto Paul. So it gave the impression that as like he moved around, you actually got different slices interacting with Paul. You got all of the beautiful subsurface on the skin, and basically what had to be done in post was then just add the rest of the CG bush around him. Obviously, there was a bunch of cleanup to be done on the walls behind him because of the projector, but you know, it was a way up of like having that amount of cleanup or getting actual subsurface interaction with him. And you know, when you combine everything together, it actually feels as if he's inside this holographic bush. And you know, and the actual show was peppered with like different techniques to like try and give us the best basis. You know, Tristan talked about the interior ornithopter work. You know, traditionally, like you would do that up against a green or blue screen inside of a studio, and we were never going to try and replicate daylight inside of a studio. And like we had discounted LED screens pretty early on because you just can't get enough sunlight, you know, intense brightness from an LED screen to be able to pull off that kind of environment. So that's why we went down the particular route of finding the highest hill outside of Budapest and surrounding it by the sunscreen dog collar to then get all of the correct light. Because you know, for me it's well, for like visual effects, if you don't get the lighting on the foreground correct to the intent of what the background is going to be, there isn't much you can do about it. It's yes, you can grade and you can push and pull, but you will never be able to truly get that correct visual between the foreground and the background. So like we spent a lot of time trying to come up with all these different techniques to be able to be successful in the post-production.
It really is amazing, and just cool trying to figure out different techniques to bring the effects into the camera. There's definitely a lot of art to that. I mean, you mentioned the impact that like just the amount of sunlight had and kind of how it drove some of the decisions you're making and like what technologies, techniques you could use. There was the heat distortion that was shown during the presentations. Like it almost feels like the heat and the sun and the sand were almost like characters in and of themselves. Were there any other ways that you feel like that influenced like how you went about accomplishing the effects?
Yeah, it was very much like, you know, each world was a different world. So like we tried to hone the actual techniques for that particular look. You know, obviously Arrakis, you know, bright sun. So we avoided doing any indoor studio work which would require, you know, us trying to fake daylight. It's just, you know, it's you can always kind of tell when like something has been shot inside of a studio. It's just one of the issues with doing things that in that particular way. There was one sequence which was a Brian sequence where like you see the Sardaukar dropping in from the roof, and then the Fremen attack them, and that was a particular set which took a good while to figure out, because like we wanted sunlight, so like we wanted sunlight coming from above to like come down onto the Fremen and to the Sardaukar. And you know, like we investigated shooting in a stadium. We tried to find the biggest areas we could, and like we just couldn't find the best place to actually shoot it. So what we actually ended up doing was that at Origo Studios in Budapest. So like you have all these different blocks, and what Greg and Patrice decided to do was that like they would, Greg being the DOP and Patrice being the art director, was that we would actually connect two of those studios together with cloth. So basically, like we kind of created a third studio, but because we had created it out of cloth, we actually cut a gobo at the top of the in the roof, which then allowed the sun to come through the roof and hit the ground. Now, you can only shoot for about 2 or 3 hours a day, because obviously that patch of sun on the ground would obviously move. But what that gave you, it gave you the correct exposure for like something so bright, but then actually surrounded in a dark area, which trying to do another way, I'm still not sure how you could do that. So having that element be the basis, and then being able to extend the world to be a lot bigger and falling off correctly with the light was the key to that actually feeling believable. You know, again, it's another example of like trying to keep things grounded and as far as possible. And Tristan touched on the Salusa Secundus setup. That was probably our most stressful shoot in that things changed very close to the shoot. So like and like we were in discussions if like we should go with a slightly off gray screens or blue screens for that particular sequence, because like it was still up in the air whether it was going to be rain. But then like what happened was that it was supposed to be an overcast day, but it wasn't. It was sunny, and then like we still wanted to do rain in camera as well. So then we quickly converted to a blue so that like we could help pick up more of the rain. And then like the rain was affecting the set, and you got mud and things everywhere. And also we had decided to go down a path of shooting some of the crowd scenes with like tiles, i.e. like you shoot like a certain quadrant with your extras, you then shift them into a different quadrant, shoot the extras. And of course, if you've got something where the weather is shifting so much, it becomes very much a challenge. But we kind of embrace that in post, in that we played this idea that on Salusa Secundus it was a very changeable weather, which, you know, sometimes you could have rays of sun coming through, but then it was still rain. So yes, this happens here on Earth, but then it was more extreme on the Salusa Secundus. So that was the most challenging shoot which we had, but like it still kept in the vein of like, okay, this is a different world, so then we're going to have a slightly different approach. And then Caladan as well, we shot out in Norway, which is an absolutely beautiful place to shoot. And there are some shots where like you look at the actual photography, and there are times where it does look otherworldly already, and like we didn't have to do much to it anyway. So yeah, I think you know, like the areas in which we chose, like we shot Arrakis in Jordan and in the UAE. Obviously, we had a backlot in Budapest, which like we surrounded with the sound screen and tried to shoot on sunny days. And then like we had interior studio work for Arrakeen, where like Patrice built these huge stages. But yeah, it was
nice. The different character of the different planets definitely comes through strongly.
Exactly.
Brian, Tristan, Robin, anything to add to that?
I think one thing you said, Rob, quite was about how effects maybe helped drive things. And it was interesting because definitely doing the Sandworm, I mean, as I spoke a little bit about it, we had to work so in line with the sand. I mean, it was Sandworm. We started off incorrectly, dealing with it slightly independently, but it had to live and breathe with the sand as it rightly would if it was real. And the simulations are so massive, but they're so descriptive. You had to work with the sand and work with the sandworm in the sand. And it was great because you realized you had to be symbiotic and you had to work out what this character did within the dunes. And then it started to tell its own story. And as Tristan said as well, it started to simulate much more like water. That's such incredible high levels. And that told this character, which evolved with me and the team as well, this kind of Sandwell. And it really just this beautiful power and elegance that came from it, as well as terrifying. So the effects with the creature was a real big thing for me and the team for Adam. It was great. It was brilliant thing to find out.
Yeah, no, it was very cool when you said that you made the jump to inspiration kind of being how a whale moves more so than like actual like creatures you would find in the desert. And then all of a sudden, yeah, like the animation clicked for me. Like when you said that, like all of a sudden the movements of the sandworm like made a lot of sense. It's very cool.
Yeah, it really told a great story. And I think it resonated with Paul and Denis as well, that it made a lot of logic and there's a lot of beauty as well. And we took a macro view of what this creature is and where it evolves and lives in this absolute vast deep desert. It was like a giant blue whale in an ocean. And yeah, it was kind of, you know, it takes a long while to get there, but when you see it, like, oh, it just hits you in the face if this is the completely right thing, you know.
Nice. All right, I'm going to start mixing in some questions from the audience. There's a bunch that have already poured in. Let's start with, we notice that there's no direct sun on Arrakis. Like, it's just all sun. It's overwhelming. The shadow work, how did you kind of decide how to work with the shadows?
Well, from a production standpoint, like we had so for example the sequence where you see the sandcrawler being taken by the worm, Greg, our DOP, actually and the Patrice actually positioned. So Patrice had built a part of the spice crawler in Budapest, like one of the tracks, one of the 6 tracks, which was a massive undertaking, and he built that in Budapest, and then like we shipped that over to Jordan. And what Greg and Patrice did was position it in a way which was in line with how the sun actually traveled along the sky. So basically what happened was that like you got a pretty consistent shadow from the track to the ground, which then allowed us to shoot throughout the day. And yes, obviously the shadow would shift slightly, from the back, but because you're always shooting, like a close up or like certain sections of it, like it did allow us to shoot throughout the day rather than having to try and fake some stuff, because obviously if you shoot at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be different from like 4 o'clock. But because of the position where the sandcrawler was, it just allowed us to constantly shoot. There's a sequence where Paul fights Jamis towards the end, and that was all shot in a particular enclave in Jordan, out in Wadi Rum, and that basically had to be timed because like we had some high walls, so Greg figured out when that area would always be in shadow, so that's exactly when we should shoot. So yeah, so like a lot of thought went into like trying to keep consistency and trying to work with the natural light.
Sounds like scheduling the shoots and playing with when the sun was where was definitely
exactly
a big consideration throughout the film.
Yeah, like we have these things called cover sets, which like when you make a schedule for like shooting a movie, especially when you're working outside, because obviously weather can change. So like, even though you may be expecting a bright sunny day, suddenly it's cloudy and you're not going to get the actual kind of look which you're after. Well, you have these things called cover sets where like if things in the shoot don't go according to plan because of the weather, you then run inside a studio and do some of the interior work. And we had a bit of a run in Budapest where like it was cloudy, and like obviously the backlot was supposed to be this hot, dry, arid environment on Arrakis, and like we kept on taking our cover days, and it got to the point where like we were down to our last cover day, which is a big problem because like you know like you then either decide to shoot on a cloudy day and then like you try to grade your way out, which is never going to be the same. And basically we got to our last day, but thankfully, and Denis always seems to land on his feet, you know, our directors, amazing guy. And like, you know, it was sunny the next day and it was sunny for the rest of the time. So, you know, it just worked out. It could have been very different.
Nice. All right. There's a few questions here also. People wanting just more details about the workflow for the sand screens. Were there many core mats to bring back skin tones on the actors? How did you actually do the keying with the sand screens and keep all the detail that you wanted to keep? Is there anybody that can kind of talk in a little bit more detail for this audience about like the actual techniques that were used?
You want to fill that one, Paul?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sure. So sand screens by and large were used to help us with mostly the edge detail and light bounce around the guy. So yes, we did need a core mat as always whenever you're doing a key, but then the edge detail preservation was more a case of balancing between using additive and multiplication techniques to keep it, not blowing away the details, but you're blending it with the background, which is an approximately the same luminance as the sand screen that you're replacing it with. That was the key bit to get right. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to say that like the guys and girls did an amazing job, because there are certain scenes where like with these 18 tons of like swirling dust and sand, which is brown, like we had those up against the brown, so like you couldn't really extract that. So it was more of a blend. And if you see the original plates for that sequence where Chani is talking about how the Fremen are fighting the Harkonnens, like some of those plates were just literally tones of brown. So like the actual compers actually putting that together, it took it's a very skillfully put together a blend, because for me, I come from compositing, and I'm a firm believer in the work I do now as a visual effects supervisor, that I prefer to have all the elements in the mix. And yes, it produces a far harder comp to actually put together. But I also know that is far more believable than if you break everything down into its clinical, different layers. You never get the like full interaction. Now, yes, it makes it harder to like blend passes together, but again, it just brings a level of realism, which like sometimes you can't get doing it via different elements. Now, obviously, the guys put together, like CG swirls of like sand and dust as well to like augment everything, but you just had a bunch of tools to be able to help bring this together. And I just want to talk about the sand screens for a second, because yes, we did a number of tests during the shoot to see if we could be able to key this work. And obviously, like, you're going to have issues with people's faces, or like if they're wearing something brown. But there are some shots where, because of the swirling dust, like even if it had been a blue or green screen, it still would have been all orange or brown as well. And coming from comp, I know the certain techniques which you can use to put this together. But there were other reasons to actually go down the route of the sand screen, because there are a couple of shots where, for example, you see the Harkonnens, and you see that there is one particular shot which, like, if you ever find, if you're able to stop in that area, you'll be able to see that the Harkonnens are marching towards the balcony, and they're just behind Raban, and you'll see a reflection in their visors, which is basically a sand color and a sky, and that there is the sand screen. So, and like, I didn't have to update that, because it looked like it was the desert and the sky. Now, if I'd done that with a blue screen, you would have ended up with blue and blue, and that would have become, that shot is not a visual effect shot. So like, and because I knew that, like, you had that like you were going to have these more diffuse, these kind of blurry reflections, that having at least a sand color in the distance would, and like catching the odd reflection, adds to the believability that you're in the scene. Whereas if it had been blue or green, you would have had to treat that as a visual effect shot, and it would never have been the same as actually capturing that in camera. So that was an added benefit of it. And knowing that we were having ornithopters, and we were having the Atreides uniform and the Harkonnens, and also reflections in visors. Even though like sometimes you had to clean that up, but like the fact that you had it available first off without, I learned something on First Man with Tristan, in that we used the LED screens, and like we had a constant background going, and you would sometimes catch reflections from the LED screen on the dials of the spaceship and that kind of thing, and those things would never have been visual effect shots to actually spend the money to put that reflection in there. So having something on set which you captured by accident I think is hugely beneficial. And then another reason for like having those types of screens is that this is a bit more of a political one, in that like I tend to find that sometimes certain parts of the on-set crew will switch off if like something is a blue screen, because everybody knows it's going to post. So like you don't have the like you don't fully clean up something because it's going into post, and like it's you get that very classic "we'll fix it in post," and we didn't have that on Dune. So it was a because people didn't realize didn't really understand what the sand screens were for. That was Arrakeen basically. So like it worked on multiple fronts. But yes, I know for a fact that there were certain shots which was going to be a lot of roto turn to actually, but it's also skillfully blended together to like there's a push that like it's not just a foreground extraction you put on the background, and okay, no, you have to work to blend all the different layers together and just make it beautiful.
I love how before this, when we were talking, you were saying how just on set there seemed to be less resistance to the people setting up the sand screens than there would have been if they were green screens, just because people felt like you're more part of the set dressing than the effects people who were there. So you're kind of like more accepted, and like it's kind of amazing psychological aspect of it.
Exactly that.
Oh, beautiful. One of the other questions, I love this question because I think somebody's kind of taking advantage, Paul, of you being here. But any tips on using IBK, especially kind of in the lights and darks? Some practical advice coming out right now.
Oh my goodness. It's been a while since I actually I am going to be doing an interview about that pretty soon with before and afters. But yeah, it's oh my goodness, it's one of the hardest things to convey to people who are first starting out with like keying is that there isn't like a magic button, like there isn't like this like magic setting which is going to produce the key for you. And once you embrace that, and like you then start working on like different areas with like different values, is then once you really start to understand that, like it's an overall process of like image transfer rather than like extraction, you know, like rather than putting like a hard key. And you know, I personally had my way of working as a compositor, and when I first came up with IBK, I would try to run these classes as to how you use it, and I quickly found out that, you know, people you know, spent a long time trying to figure out how they key and how they do things. And doesn't matter how many times I can tell somebody that using the subtraction method of the foreground is better than just pre-multing the alpha. People, it just doesn't matter. You know, people have like figured out their own way. And you know, I was just trying to convey as to if you do it in a particular way, you'll get a better edge. But yeah, I kind of abandoned those classes because, you know, people it's very much an experience thing, and people have their techniques. But you know, there are a million ways to actually key something. You know, it's you know, and everything is valid. You know, every way of working is valid, and you know, you use your core mat for like you use one particular technique for your core mats, and you know, for IBK, it's trying to you know, it's trying to produce the color clip which will best give you the best key from, you know, a lot of people call it a clean screen, but that was never the outset of the actual technique. The actual technique was to like try and have it so that you could have a variant blue color or a variant green color throughout the actual pick. So rather than pick one color, you know, you could embrace the plate, and it's a very simple technique which I put together for the IBK color is to just expand edges. And you know, if you pop open the actual gizmo inside Nuke, you'll see that it's a very simple idea. And like even you can pop open the IBK Gizmo, and you know, some people have realized that there are 4 inputs rather than the 3 inputs, which you see in the Gizmo, and some people have gone down that path, and there are actual extra additional checkboxes in there which you can play with, which will give you this idea of a floating point mat. And there's a whole world in there which like I was obsessed with like a good what, 13 years ago with that. So yeah, it's you know, it's you know, like and I'm going to reiterate that, like, you know, if you you know, it's all about different patches and using different values, and you can vary up your image, you can vary up your input for the color by like basically just drawing beziers around certain areas, and then just slightly changing that blue, or like, you know, it's all there isn't a, you know, like a one defined way of doing it. It's very much the art of compositing, trying to image transfer one image to another, you know. Sorry, right. I rambled on a bit there.
No, it's I never even thought to kind of break open the Gizmo and start seeing what's going on inside. So, valuable tip like, for the comp artists hanging out over here.
There are far more checkboxes in there to play with.
Nice. Now, the ramble was appreciated. Apparently, we're good. All right. Little kind of simpler, more solid question. I'll do the rounds. There's been a few questions. Just what software was used in the making of the movie? Brian, start with you. You've been quiet for a while.
Oh, sorry, I'm just listening. You know, I mean, I think we use a lot of the stuff that other people use, you know, Nuke obviously being, and the tool set and the custom tools that we've made at DNEG to kind of get us there faster and for a greater good of people is really nice. We use Clarice which can handle massive amounts of geometry, cities included, of course, and destroy them to render the 3D. And you know, I think we of course have Houdini embedded, and we use that for the sandstorm and for the water and the ocean. That was you know, that's just something that it just takes time and patience and planning to pull off. But you know, we had to obviously write a bunch of custom tools to pull things off that I'm sure Tristan can elaborate on as well.
A few custom tools written mostly in Houdini, because it's not going to say it's easy because I can't do it, but it's easier to get to the engine, I guess, in Houdini. So yeah, that was used. We did render a couple of things in Mantra and then combined it afterwards with the Clarice renders. That created its own little problems, but we got around those. And of course, Maya was used. I saw someone mention in the chat about Embergen, but we didn't use that, unfortunately, on this one. That's got some interesting things in there. I've been keeping an eye on those guys. Maybe next time. Robin, anything to add from your end?
Yeah, I think it's mostly Maya for all performance stuff and all the front end work, and for the creature work as well, a little bit Houdini, but mostly Maya for rigs and anim and layout and asset builds. Yeah, and I think pretty much any proprietary stuff I did DNEG is really operational, but yeah, as usual for anim, curves and keys, Maya does it best at the moment.
Excellent. All right, another few nice concrete ones. Was ACES used on the production for managing color?
No, we didn't use ACES on this show. It was straight from Alexa Loxy, I believe. Quick answer. Sorry.
No, that's I'm intentionally going to a couple that I think we'll get some quick answers for. Let's in the one shot, the onesie, was Timothy's face CG as well, or was it Compton?
I'd like to take credit to animate that face, but no, that was the beautiful Mr. Chalamet himself put into the shot.
Yeah, so basically what we did is Props had created a rig which would give us the actual light, which would on like a Timothy's face. So that element is real, and then that was put into the rest of the CG background, but that was real.
It's the only real part of the entire shot, I think.
Exactly. Exactly.
Excellent. All right, one more of those. Was deep compositing used at all?
Yes, with that much sand, I shudder to think how we would have done it without it. You could do the old school way of rendering with and without holdouts, but then we're probably still working on it. Yeah. So yeah, deep was definitely used for that, and yeah, some of the explosion shots as well. Yeah, I'd say it's heavily used.
Excellent. So one that I was a little bit curious about. You talked about COVID and how at the start of it you kind of had to switch over, especially for the mocap. I was just kind of curious, like the 2 weeks around when you learned that there was travel restrictions, you weren't going to be able to do all of the in-person work. Like, what was that transition like to get things set up so that you could do the work remotely?
Yeah, it was a crazy time. Like we were literally going to the studio at Digital Domain on the Monday, and to like shoot the mocap. I think this was like sometime in March or something like that, and we called it, and basically everybody went home, and like that was that was cancelled, and we only did that something like about 6 months later or something like that.
Yeah, it's like I think 4 months later, wasn't it, Paul? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So like, but like, you know, for basically, Denis went back to back to Montreal. I stayed in LA, and like Dina got dispersed back home, and it was actually really really impressive that how quickly things got back up and running. Like, you know, within a week, I was already doing reviews every day with everybody. I was doing reviews with Denis on a Wednesday and a Friday, and you know, we're all connected by Slack, you know, or like Zoom and CineSync, and it worked really well. I know that for like visual effects, you know, it worked really well for Denis because, you know, it's not an interactive process. I show him something, he has commented after. It takes us a few days to actually turn it around. But I know that he had issues trying to edit the movie from a distance. You know, like he likes the close contact with his editor, but from a visual effects standpoint, from a production standpoint, it was about a week of downtime. It was really impressive, really impressive.
No, like definitely. IT departments, developers are in the industry, definitely turned the ship quickly. Plans that had been like a few years from now, maybe we'll do a few of these things turned around a few days from now instead.
Exactly.
You know, just to touch on that, one of the things, you know, we went from a screening room with laser pointers and you know, an editor sometimes to basically everything goes through you or you know, myself, and I'm sure Tristan and everybody. You're controlling everything that's seen. Everybody is you're really easily able to put stuff in for reference and talk and look at different shots, and it was a very nice different way of working that I felt like it was more intimate with myself and the artists, and we could really just figure it out very quickly on the fly because you have everything available for the whole show. So that was something that was, I actually have to say, I kind of think my crew and team got a little bit more out of it than just sitting in a dark room, even though, don't get me wrong, I love seeing things big. That's for sure. But just to get into the minutia of it, it was very, like, you just had it all at hand. I don't know if what you think, Tristan, but I found it like very kind of refreshing.
Yeah, it's definitely much more hands-on. It's quicker. I think quicker to give feedback, a little bit more efficient to give feedback. Took me a little while to get used to annotating on stuff because I was used to the lazy man's laser pointer, right? But
it's really easy to do that, right?
it is. Change this. No, I don't do that. But and then you can bring in previous versions and quickly compare with them. You haven't got to ask someone else to do it via proxy. You have full control. It's not the same as being in the office. I do miss that contact and everything. But in terms of productivity, I certainly see it. There's no worse than being in the office.
I think from my point of view as well, it's actually quite different for anim because we do have a little more of an instant turnaround because our shots are iterated a lot in Playblast. So you want to tweak a finger, say no, not that, like this. So you need it interacting, especially for the mocap shoot. But what it did is, means you had to be so thorough in your preparation because when it was live, it was going and you couldn't interact and really visually see exactly what's going right and wrong. So what it meant for me was, I just triple down on my prep, which was fine because it meant you were absolutely ruthless. And I think other people did it as well. So when it came to doing those shoots for the Oneer, which was a massive amount of preparation, I was surprised it went so well. But everyone had to prepare and go through it, and it was working, and people had seen and read things so many times. So it did connect it really well. It's almost like everyone was on it. Everyone was really drilled in on it. And that kind of was very surprising. It's almost the distraction of not having people around made you really be accurate and exactly what you wanted to get out of it. So it's fascinating to see.
It's amazing. It's interesting. I wasn't expecting those to be the dynamics that emerged from being forced to work remotely. It's like more attention and kind of better dynamic, or refreshing dynamic, if not better. All right, I think we are at the end of our Q&A time, and there's so many good questions that I think we could easily go for
We
another
have
hour.
like 19 questions still in there. Yeah, definitely you can go on for a lot, but unfortunately we can't. But I do have one question. I couldn't post it in there. What's with the spider? It's not in the book. What did Denis think? Well, what was he thinking when he decided to create this this spider pet?
Yeah, it was a request during the shoot. You know, he didn't really elaborate on its history, but you do see spiders in other Denis Villeneuve movies.
Oh, okay. Well, the other thing is like when the palm trees, I was like, where did that come from? I'm like, total sci-fi nerd here. Was like, did they bring that from Earth or?
Again, the palm trees are like an extravagant visual of Harkonnen greed in that, like to actually get the palm tree to actually live in that environment. I think in the movie it kind of says that it takes the water of like a certain amount of men to each day to actually keep it. So yes, it's very much part of the narrative that the previous rulers, the Harkonnens, were like very very extravagant, basically.
There are some interviews out there. We don't have time to go into it now, but for anybody watching, if you kind of search on the practical effects that were done for the burning of the palm trees during the battle scene, it's amazing, kind of what was done in order to get that in camera.
Yeah, and that again was a night shoot, and there's only a certain run of how much fire you can do from those palm trees before like things don't work. So like it got like a little bit dicey because like we were doing take after take, and the fire was running out. So but it worked out.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was an amazing discussion. Again, thank you everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.